First of all, isolating the variable by performing the opposite operation, and ultimately trying to get that variable or solve it by getting that variable by itself. Now, we have to keep in mind which rule? Which one? Which one? The rule, the rule. Oh man, yeah. The golden rule, the golden rule. That's very true. We got to keep it in mind. So let's zoom in on this one right here. Okay? Let's zoom in on this, and I'll even zoom in further right here. What do we want to isolate here, Miss Walker? We want to get x by itself, okay? So, I'm going to go through this first one, but I'm going to do it step by step. Number one, we want to isolate the variable. That's what we want to do. That's our goal. We want to isolate it. We want to get it by itself. And we can identify the variable as being x right there. Okay? Now, anything that is attached to x, anything at all, we can or we have to move to the other side of the equation. So the way I've structured this is that there is a side 1 and there is a side 2. Okay, and everything in between is just the sign equal sign. Okay? Yes, Isabella?
I used the line last.
That's good. And this is a good way of thinking about it. If you struggle with this, this is a good way to try to break the problem down. And I will tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that you're going to have multiplication and addition versions of, or multiplication and, division versions of this. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and start with what we need to do here. How are we going to get x by itself? What is the first thing we have to do? Yeah, Savannah? We've got to do the opposite operation. Okay? What operations are happening to or around x? Jackson? Subtraction is happening. Yep, subtraction is happening right here. Okay? And because subtraction is happening, we're going to do the opposite of that. We're going to do addition. And so what are we going to add? Gretchen?
6.
Yeah. We're going to add 6 to both sides. Okay, so I'm going to add 6 and 6. All right, now, the way this works out, and you would have seen this in your book in a very similar way, is that you would have had x minus 6 plus 6, and you would have had negative 55 plus 6. Okay, this is what you're working with. What happens to my minus 6 and my plus 6? What's going to happen there? Yeah, Isabella? Yeah, they're going to cancel each other out, and they're going to become 0, the lovely O of mathematics. And so we end up with x plus 0, which ends up being just x, equals, by the way, there's equal signs here. What's negative 55 plus 6? Okay, Jackson?
61.
Okay, now you say 61, and if I was adding 55 and 6, it would be 61. But because it's negative 55 and I'm adding a positive 6, it will not be negative 61 or positive 61. Hold on, hands down. Let's look at this on a number line real quick. Oh, I love number lines. This is great. Okay. I have negative 55, and I'm going to add 6. Okay, I'm moving it in the positive direction. So I'm going back towards 0, somewhere over here. And what will that be? Yeah, Macy. It was going to be negative 49. Okay? So, we know that that number right there is going to be a negative 49. And because I've isolated my variable, I'm done.
Can you go back to that line? So the number line. Thanks.
Yep. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you right now, I know positive and negatives when you're adding them can be a little tricky, okay? Think of them in terms of a number line. And if you want a number line sheet, there's some online that I can send to you and you can print right off. They'll be great. It really helps to think, okay, what am I doing? Am I moving left? Am I moving right? Am I adding or am I subtracting? We'll tell you positives and negatives when we're adding and subtracting are tricky. Okay? They are. They really are. All right. Now, does everyone understand this one okay? Okay. Yeah, Savannah?
We have to show all that work.
You really should on this. Yes. You really should. Yeah, but let's take a look at it, okay? Let's take a look at it. The reason we show all this work, okay, let's move on to the next one, is because it helps us identify where we make a mistake, whether it's in the first part of the problem, the second part, the third, or the fourth part. All right, here, ladies and gentlemen, this is tricky because I have a negative 83.4 plus m. Is there another way I could write this that might make my work a little easier? Parker?
Can we estimate?
We're not going to estimate.
I have no clue.
Okay. Savannah?
Wait, I know. You switch -83.4 and m.
I can actually switch them by the commutative property of addition. I can flip-flop them so that I have m basically minus 83.4. Okay, I can switch them. If that's confusing to you, okay, then, and I'll come back with that in just a minute. Okay, just take a look up here for a moment. You could have m plus a negative 83.4. Okay. However, when you're adding a negative, it's the same thing as subtraction. Okay, when you're adding a negative, we call this adding the opposite. Does that sound familiar? It should sound familiar. Adding the opposite. So really, this is m minus 83.4 equals 122. It's okay to rewrite it. That's why I gave you so much space. Ms. Walker?
Could you leave it the same?
You could. I will tell you that thinking about it like this will help you solve it better. But you can still solve it in any one of these formats. Sure. Yes.
But if you did, but how would it be easy?
How will it be easier?
Because I did the work, it was the same as doing the top problem.
Okay, well, let me come back to it and I'll show you why, okay? If we think of it in terms of this, what do we have to do to get m by itself? What do we have to do? Yeah.
Subtract.
Okay. You're right, Isabella. We could subtract a negative 83.4, okay? Let me take that approach. I'm going to move this down a little bit. Out of the way. I'll come back to that in just a minute. Let's subtract a negative 83.4. I actually really like that. I really like the way you said it. I really like that you brought it up. All right. When we subtract a negative, what are we really doing? When you subtract a negative, what are you really doing? Yeah. You're really adding it. You're really adding it. When you subtract a negative, you're really just adding the number. Subtraction means to add the opposite, okay? Subtraction means to add the opposite. So if I add the opposite, I would be adding the opposite of a negative 83.4, which, Anna, is what? The opposite of a negative is a positive. So the subtraction is adding the opposite. It's the same thing as adding a positive 83.4. Well, here's why I wrote it like this near the bottom, because it's like adding an 83.4.
But wouldn't you have to change it?
For instance, you're subtracting a negative 83.4, you would change that to really a positive 83.4. And then you end up with the same problem, okay? You end up with positive 83.4 being added to both sides. Take a look. Take a really close look. As soon as I do this, subtract a negative, that automatically makes it a positive. This is basically what we're doing right here. We're adding 83.4 to both sides. When you do that, what happens to the 83.4 on the left-hand side? What happens? It goes away. And we're left with m equals what? Yeah, that is correct. If you got to 205.4, then you have performed the correct sequence of mathematical steps. Now, if it wasn't exactly the same as mine, that's fine. Ladies and gentlemen, that's fine. Okay, some of you are going to think about this differently because subtraction and negative numbers are tricky business. But if you got to 205.4 in your brain and on paper, you are performing the correct sequence of mathematical operations. Yes, Ms. Walker. Ms. Walker is going to make a debut appearance in this recording. So far, we're up to 4 times. So that's good. That's good. We're just, yeah, this is great. I just want you to think about it in different ways. I want to make sure people understand the whole subtracting a negative thing because that confuses people. All of you have struggled with this at some point, and you may still continue to be. That's why there's a lot of these to practice today. Let's not even change it. Let's just treat it exactly how it is. Let's just treat it exactly how it is. Up here, we see that we are subtracting a positive 6. Is that correct? This is the same thing as subtracting a positive 6. Is that not true? Okay, it is. We are subtracting a positive 6. Down here, we are adding a negative. Okay? So what I'm going to do is the following. I am going to subtract it from that side. I'm going to subtract it because addition is being done. Okay, and I have to do the opposite operation. And I have to subtract that exact same number, a negative 83.4, in order to get rid of it. Subtraction means to remove. So I have to remove the whole negative 83.4 from that side. And because I've done that, I have to then remove the negative 83.4 from the other side. When you subtract a negative, it becomes a positive. So this is the exact same thing as adding the positive version of 83.4. It's the exact same math. And this goes back to the very first week of this class. What I want you to know is that when you subtract the negative, that's tricky, okay? That's tricky. So this is what we end up having. Negative 83.4 plus 83.4 plus m like so. And over here, we will have 122 plus 83.4. When you have the 2 on the left-hand side, these two, they cancel each other out. And so you're left with m equals 205.4. There are about 4 different ways you could do this problem and do it correctly. If you don't understand one of the ways, that's okay. But please understand, if you did get to the correct answer, you followed the proper order or sequence of mathematical steps. If you did not, then the odds are you struggle with adding positive and negative numbers, in which case then we have to look at that a little bit more. Let's try a different one right here. What am I going to do with this problem right here? I've got to get what by itself? Gabby, what do you think? Yeah, I got to get h by itself, this guy right here. Okay? And so what am I going to do then to both sides to get h by itself? Yeah, Miss Lalonde?
Subtract 34.
I don't want to subtract 34. What do I want to do? I'm doing subtraction. I need to perform the opposite operation. What is opposite of subtraction? Gretchen? Addition. So I'm going to add to both sides. This I have just identified. But I'm going to add what number to both sides? Has to be the same number. Caitlin?
37.
I'm going to add 37 to both sides. Yeah. Okay. Now, what happens to the negative 37 and the positive 37? Let me write it out. You have h minus 37 plus 37. And that's going to equal negative 42 plus 37. What's going to happen to these right here? What's going to happen to them? Yeah, Anna? They're going to disappear because they become 0. And so we're left with h because these go away. And that's going to equal what? This is, again, one of those negatives plus positives business. What are we going to have? Gretchen? Yeah, negative 5. Negative 5. Now, for those of you that struggle with that a little bit, let me go ahead and draw a number line so I can explain that idea here real quick. If you have a number line and you started at negative 42 and you add 37, you're moving 37 to the right. I'm not going to go all the way to 0 because I'd have to go 42 spaces to get to 0. So I'm going to come up just short of 0 on the negative side. 0 would be over here. Okay? And I'm going to end up stopping, if you were to actually count this out, at negative 5. Okay? So that's why our answer is this. Now, there is a way you can double check your answer. If you're concerned that you didn't do it correctly, you can double check it by plugging it into the original problem. You will be required to do this, so pay close attention. If I have at h minus 37 equals negative 42, I can plug that negative 5 in to see if it works. So I could say negative 5 minus 37 equals negative 42. Okay, zoom in on this a little bit. You should try it. At least do every couple, just to make sure you're on the right track. One on each page would be a great idea, Ms. Parker. Yeah. All right, this is the same thing as negative 5 plus a negative 37 equals negative 42. Because it's like adding the opposite. And negative 5 plus negative 37 is indeed negative 42. Do they equal each other? They do. So it works. Yes, Ms. Walker. Mm-hmm. Okay. You bring up a very good point. There are two schools on negatives and positives. There is the addition subtraction school, and there is the multiplication division school. The rules do not work in the other school. For instance, only rules for addition and subtraction work for addition and subtraction, and only rules for multiplication and division work for multiplication and division. Okay? Now, Miss Berg brought to my attention a really useful tool for the multiplication division ones, and that is that if you draw a triangle like this, and you put a negative, and a positive, okay, you can actually use that to help determine what your answer will be when you're multiplying and dividing. Here's how this works. If you cover up that was rather timely. Okay, let's just come back to it here. If you cover up, let's say you're multiplying a negative and a positive. If we cover those up, our answer will be negative, the one that's not covered. If I multiply a negative and a negative, you cover them up, my answer would be positive. If I multiply a negative and a positive, I get a negative. So I'm covering those two up. If I divide, it's the same thing. If I divide a negative and a negative, my answer is positive. If I divide a negative and a positive, my answer is negative. Okay? However, with addition and subtraction, there is no rule. You have to know how they work on a number line. If you can't think of it in terms of a number line, you will struggle with addition and subtraction of positive and negative numbers forever. So what you have to understand is that when a negative minus a number, well, that's, you got to think of it in terms of negatives and positives. You got to think of it in terms of a number line, which direction you're moving. Maybe we need to revisit that a little bit, so I will here real quick, okay? Because this will help for the rest of the day. We have a little bit of time left. I'm going to do one more example of the positives and negatives, adding and subtracting, and I'm going to let you go with this, okay? So here's how this, and if you would like to work ahead on it, you may go ahead if you're good with the rest of this. For the rest of you, please be quiet, though, for those that want to watch. If I have a negative 4 and I subtract 4, what is my answer going to be? Yes? Yes, that is correct. It's going to be negative 8. Okay? Subtraction is the same thing as adding the opposite. Here's a helpful way of thinking about this. Put the number after subtraction in parentheses. Okay? Now think of it in terms of adding the opposite. Okay? So what happens is, let me erase this. What happens is this. My negative 4 becomes adding, what is the opposite of a positive? Mr. Connolly, what is the opposite of a positive? A negative. So this becomes a negative 4. Negative 4 plus negative 4 is what? Negative 4 plus negative 4. I have negative 4 on a number line, and I am taking away 4 more. Where am I going to go? Yes. Negative 8.
So if you added a positive 4 plus negative 4, that would be 0?
Let's visit that idea.
Am I
Oh,
wrong?
I don't know. We'll have to see. Oh, I'm going to do it on the paper. Oh, I'm excited. Oh, man. Okay, what was yours? Say it again.
I think it was positive 4
Plus
plus negative 4.
a negative 4. Okay? So let's think about this in terms of a number line. I start with a positive 4. And I am adding negative 4. I'm going to go back 4 spaces. Okay? And therefore, where am I going to end up? 0. Yes. So this does equal 0. So you were correct. Okay? Let's look at another tricky one, though. This is one that is the hardest for people to understand. Where you have, let's say you have 6 minus a negative 3. Okay, this is the one we were dealing with today. Think of subtraction as adding the opposite. Okay? Adding the opposite. So this becomes not 6 minus a negative 3, but it becomes 6 plus the opposite of negative 3. What is the opposite of negative 3? Yeah, positive 3. So we're adding the opposite, a positive 3. What is 6 plus 3? 9. So the trick of it is to think of this setup right here as basically being the equivalent of addition.